Ryan here with Prudential Pest Solutions, and in this video we're going to be discussing how we remove bats from houses, how we evict colonies of bats, what you can do if you have bats in your house, how the bats are getting in, and what are some of the treatment methods that we have after the bats are gone to prevent things like bat bugs, which are the direct cousin of the bed bug, from coming into your house and feeding on your family. So in general, we do not kill bats. Bats are very beneficial. They pose really zero risk to humans unless they're living in a structure. And the reason for that is that they accumulate droppings in such large piles, which are about the similar size as rodent droppings, but they'll make them in giant piles. And it depends on how many bats you have. But that is where the health issue comes in, because on these piles of droppings grows a mold spore, which when airborne can cause all kinds of health problems for humans. So number one is we got to figure out how the bats are getting in. We got to get them out of there. We got to ensure that they can't get back in. And then we got to come up with a treatment and a cleanup process after we're all said and done. So I thought I would show you, well, before we show you where some common areas they get into the house are, I'm going to show you how we get them out of the house. This is a bat cone or a bat eviction cone. And what you can see is it's tapered, it's smooth on the inside. The bigger opening goes over the opening. So if the bats are getting in on your house and you put this over like this, and you got to put it at a downward angle, the bats exit the structure, fly away. But here's the great thing, they can't get back in. So we're essentially changing the locks on them, so to speak. And it's really effective if you seal up all the other entrances around the house. Now, where do bats typically get in? Well, I thought I could show you a million examples of different houses, but it might be a little bit easier if I show you on a small house. Now, I have all daughters, so we have a ton of doll houses in my house. And I thought, you know what, this is a great example to show you how bats get into a structure. So most commonly, well, let me start by saying that bats, unlike rodents, will not chew to get into a structure, meaning that they're only going to exploit an opening that's already there. They need a little bit bigger than a mouse to get in, a little bit bigger size opening than a mouse, but still very small. I mean, these are, you know, a small brown bat in Pennsylvania is pretty small. So I'm going to show you on here where we typically find bats getting into houses. So let's look on the side of this house first. We can see here that this trim board, this is your fascia board. And what a lot of times is, I should say, is that when this is installed, there's a gap. And actually, even on this plastic dollhouse, we can see that there's a gap under here. And what happens is the bats can grip onto the wall. In this case, it's plastic, but it's mimicking brick or stone. And they can scoot right under that fascia board. And once they're in that fascia board, they have access to the attic space or the crawl space. So in a circumstance like this, we would seal up this area, and then we would put a cone, boom, just like that. We'd wait a week or two, depending on the time of year, and the bats would leave, and then we'd come back out and take this off and reseal up that last little area. But that's not the only place on this particular house that bats can get in. Let's look at the front. So on the front, we have what's called dormers. All right, so these are little roof areas that are coming off of the main roof. And right here, in this little nook here, on either side of these dormers, when the roofers install a roof or they're doing roof repair, they're making sure the water's staying out of there, they're making sure the shingles look beautiful, and all the flashing and gutters are great. Roofers are not wildlife control technicians like we are, so they're not thinking about things like bats. Just like when I'm on a roof, I'm not thinking about how beautiful the shingles are. I'm looking for animal entrances. So where these dormer roofs meet the main roof, there's usually a gap. And again, we can do the same thing. We can seal it up, we can install flashing, but the most important thing is we have to install one of these coming off of there so that we can get them out. Another common area that we find on a house, and we're just going to pretend that this window here is a louvered vent, but it's called a soffit, or I'm sorry, it's called a gable vent. And these are usually rectangular or they're triangular in shape. They'll have louvers on it, and they'll usually have some insect screening on the back. Well, a lot of times over the years, the insect screening becomes deteriorated, it breaks open, and the bats can get right into these vents. Now, we don't want to just close this off with wood or sealant or anything like that, because it's important. A gable vent's designed to draw air in and then to exhaust elsewhere. And you need that airflow in an attic to keep moisture out and maintain the life of your roof. So what we do is, if you have a gable vent, is we'll screen this off with 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch hardware cloth, and then we can do the same thing. We can install a cone right over top of this. So in this simple example on this plastic play school, well, I guess it's Fisher Price, little kids playhouse here, is that this is a really good indication of some of the areas where bats get into a house. So let's recap. We have underneath the fascia, and again, this can extend all the way over, right? I mean, we've seen them come through here on the front of a house. We have the dormer windows, either sides of the dormers, and we have the gables, the gable vent areas. So those are 3 very, very common ways that bats get into a house. So, like I said, we use a simple, we use a black, low expansion, hard forming foam, because again, bats, unlike squirrels and mice, they won't chew. They're just going to exploit what's already there. So in a house like this, let's say the main opening was right here on the fascia board. We would seal up on either side of the opening. We would install the cone, and then we'd go around the rest of the house and ensure everything else is sealed up, because think about it like this. If we change the locks on them, they're not honorable enough to just say, "Oh, you got us, we're moving on." Think about this. If you went out to dinner with your spouse and you came home and your doors were locked, you wouldn't just say, "We made a mistake, we're moving." No, you would try every other possible way to get back into your house. Bats are the same way. They think this is their house. So when we install this cone, like over the fascia here, we're going to go and check the dormers. We're going to check the gable vents. We're going to seal up all those other areas or install screening to ensure that this is the only place that they can come out and that they can't get back in. That's the key to effective bat control. And that's where a lot of bat projects fail, is that you don't identify all the openings or even the potential openings that bats can get in. So we have this on successfully. The bats have left. Great. We come back out again after a week or two, and we're going to remove this cone and we're going to seal up that last remaining opening. Awesome. Now we don't have bats and new bats can't get in. Now what? Well, like I said, the bat droppings that are in there, if accessible, we're going to have to clean those up. And it's a combination of us wearing respirators, full hazmat suits. We have to disinfect the droppings, and we use a HEPA filter vacuum to remove those. Because again, with the droppings accumulating in such piles, you have to ensure that none of those particles are going to go airborne. So wetting it down with a wettable disinfectant or an insecticide is great. And then removing it with the HEPA filter. We're just avoiding any of that airborne risk. Now, I said bat bugs in the beginning of the video. What's that, right? Well, bat bugs look almost identical to the naked eye as bed bugs. And just like bed bugs, which are their cousins, they're blood-feeding insects. They feed on bat colonies. So, when you have a bat colony evicted from a home, that's not just the end of it, even if you don't want to mess with the droppings. We always do an insecticidal treatment in the attic space and in the main part of the home, because what happens is when the bats leave, we evict them using our bat cone. Those bat bugs are not just going to go, "Well, our food's gone, I guess we'll just, go off into the sunset and die." No, they're going to search out a new food source. And guess where that new food source is? That's right, the family living below. So we have to ensure that, number one, the bats are successfully evicted, but we also have to ensure that pests commonly associated with bat and wildlife infestations, such as bat bugs, are also treated and eradicated for, so that the homeowner doesn't just have the bats gone and now they have bat bugs or bed bugs. We have to ensure that they don't have any of those things. So that's a rundown of our process. Now, I should also say that there's a certain time of year in Pennsylvania where we cannot evict bats from structures. And that time is from the end of May through the end of July, because bats are protected during that period as they're in their maternity colonies. So what that means is that bats are very beneficial to the environment. And again, we would never kill bats. Bats only have one live offspring per breeding pair, right? So if we were to evict in the middle of June, so to say, let's say in the middle of June, where they're protected, you can't do that. But let's say we did that. The adults would leave, but all the little ones, all the baby bats, they can't leave yet. So they're going to die. So you would essentially be, yeah, you're not killing adult bats by putting this on in June. you're going to be killing off the whole next generation because none of those other little bats are old enough to fly yet. It's also why we oftentimes will get phone calls maybe in the middle of summer where someone will say, I have a really tiny baby bat that I found in my basement. What's that about? Well, if you figure that the bats are in the attic, they like to hang out up high, right? Well, young bats are brand new to this thing called life, and they haven't figured stuff out yet. And on the inside of a house, you're going to have pipes in the walls. You're going to have wires in the walls, and they're going to go all the way up from the basement all the way up to the attic. And all it takes is a tiny little bat to get lost somewhere in the walls and end up in your basement. So when we do find a baby bat in the basement, or a juvenile bat in the basement, it's usually an indication that there is a colony or at least adults in the attic somewhere. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, if you do have bat issue in the middle, and let's say it's in that protected time period from the end of May through the end of July, what can we do? Well, we can't evict the bats from the structure. All right, we can't. We have to allow the bats to continue to come and go. And sometimes that's a tough conversation to have with a homeowner that has 100+ bats in their house. Here's what we can do though. We can ensure that the bats stay isolated in the attic and they can't get into the living space of the house. Most people know they have bats because they've woken up in the middle of the night to hearing fluttering or something going across their face and they're like, whoa, what was that? It was a bat. We can ensure that we seal off the attic from the house so that they can't come down into the living space. We just can't evict them from the structure completely, but we can at least protect the family from having a bat encounter. All right, so that's kind of our 3-step, 5-step, whatever you want to say process is. Number 1, identifying all the places they can get in, eliminating all the places they can get in, leaving one opening where we put a bat cone. And you can also use hardware cloth, you can use a sheet, anything that's going to allow them to leave and not come back. And then we're going to evaluate any cleanup and treat for bat bugs. That's our multi-step process. We're going to ensure they can't get into the living place of the home. So if you have bats or you think you have bats, give Prudential Pest Solutions a call or text us at 484-401-4361. We service all of Berks County, Chester County, and Southeastern Pennsylvania.